When Balatro launched early this year, it managed to capture an astronomical audience immediately. Blending the basics of poker, then throwing the entire script out of the window, it's fun, weird, and kind of nothing like poker. It's quite like a few different roguelikes that came out before it, yet different enough to stand out in a year stacked with excellent releases. With this meteoric rise comes equally big expectations, and this is why when a Twitter user joked that Balatro was a psyop to get kids addicted to gambling, Local Thunk, the developer, clarified that he stipulated in his will that Balatro will never be sold to a gambling company. Balatro and games like it don't really work from a traditional gambling perspective. They still have probability, but not like you might learn, and their betting system is so skewed you're better off not knowing the rules to poker itself. It has cemented itself as a gambling game for non-gamblers. Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers is another very similar title I've been playing recently, and though it has some struggles in some areas, it has that same charm. Before we start properly, Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers is like Balatro when it comes to its gameplay and roles in the game market, but it's not derivative of it. It had a playable demo over on itch.io almost a year before the release of Balatro. Minds think alike, well, a lot, and that seems to be the case here. However, I do think that comparison is important, not just to contextualize a new game with one of the biggest indie hits of the year, but also its approach to the game it takes from. Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers places you initially in the seedy hall of a tavern, where you have to take on gamblers to earn chips, which can be spent on more cards. As you might be able to tell from that word just before gamblers and just after and, the game doesn't look particularly kindly on its NPCs. You play hands of blackjack against chosen opponents, and both their deck and playstyle is choreographed ahead of time. Not only can you learn their method by analysing the opponent you go against, but you are told what number they choose to stand at and can even look through their deck. This means if you plan ahead, you can use your cards to take out central pieces and push busts. For instance, one character may stand very early and may even have cards that give them a 21 by itself. This can make them deadly as they automatically win some hands. With another card, you can change the rules, making their max number 20. This sense of strategy allows you to cheat, in heavy quotations, to plan ahead for runs. This can genuinely feel fantastic, allowing you to beat bosses that felt unkillable mere hours prior. See, you can win a round by getting blackjack, but damage is dealt to opponents based on the difference between your hand and theirs. If you choose to stand at 15 and they go bust, they take 15 damage. If you stand at 15 and they get blackjack, you take 6. This is then further complicated as when you get a blackjack, you have extra effects based on the suit making up that blackjack, with hearts healing you, clubs dealing extra damage, etc. This means there is even more of a reason to go for that perfect number, and matching an enemy's blackjack could stop them from healing or developing shields. It's partially a war of attrition and partially an arms race. Instead of losing or gaining chips based on winning or losing a hand, losing a hand can result in you getting entirely knocked out and forced to start over again. The chips you win are a reward for pummeling their face in and moving on to the next round. In pursuit of this, you start in a tavern but make your way through dingy sewers, executive suites and more to climb up a corrupted casino. Your aim is to find out who's behind it all and take them down, or something like that. The story doesn't matter as much as the aesthetic of these arenas. All come with unique fights, cards and more, and feel like more an excuse to raise the stakes than tell a much greater story. For its purpose, it works. It's a game you can get running and playing in just a few minutes, without cutscenes and really much of a tutorial. However, the opening area functions as its own tutorial, slowly upping the stakes and raising the difficulty over time. The game gets more difficult with subsequent successful runs, allowing you to change the deck you start with. The heart deck is a clear winner early on, as finding ways to regain HP is rare and expensive. With a couple of lucky hands, you can regain much more, much quicker. The upside of this deck is you rarely have to go into certain rooms just to get heals, which effectively gives you more access to more items as you go. However, some later decks, like the Wizard deck, which replicates a card each turn, is basically certain death when you come across Jaskier from The Witcher. Yeah, it's a silly IP blend that makes references to tons of games, and you could make a more cynical argument about manipulating you into endearment through this, but I don't really think that's fair. I think it's more akin to Party Box, a way to play Magic the Gathering that I've been meaning to do for a long time. See, in this mode, instead of each player having a curated deck that they build themselves, or buy as precons if you're a scoundrel like myself, instead, one person builds a huge deck consisting of hundreds of cards from pretty much everywhere. One drawer could give you a Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon card, where another gives you a baseball card, or even a business card. As you play Party Box with more people, you slowly build it up and have a story around each card's inclusion. It's a good way to get rid of bulk, and it stops one person from bringing a min-max deck capable of wiping the floor with everyone. I see some of this joy in the cards present here, with them all having game-changing effects. For instance, the Jaskier card that makes him near unbeatable as the wizard deck is the Geralt card, which burns one card of the controller's choice. These are excellent and make for a good spot removal, allowing you to take out key parts of a deck's build, so to speak. With the wizard deck, it's often used to take out the card that duplicates others, meaning you stay standing at a small number every round. This is, frankly, a great card all the way through the entire game, meaning I often grab as many as I possibly can. Interestingly, taking on extra cards gives you access to more firepower, but it also makes your build less focused. In this sense, you often beat out opponents in answers despite their deck having that tightness to it. It makes them more vulnerable to having their hands messed with, and that ends up being the best way to get through them. However, one unfortunate consequence of the way decks are built is you quickly settle on a winning strategy and are rarely incentivized to move outside of that. This can make some games a little boring and makes the first area more laborious to get through. It also just doesn't let the creativity of some of the game's cards and win conditions shine. You can make builds around busting as hard as possible to do extra damage, or taking damage to do 2 or 3 times that back, which are somewhat viable, but when the build-up is a little long, why wouldn't I commit to a strategy I already know works? The problem is, these individual parts to make up a build all need to be found to make something viable, often, and this means suffering through tens of fights, just barely scraping a win if you're lucky, in order to still struggle on bosses later on. I spoke about how the game is less focused on the story, but the aesthetic of stories, and for this, I actually really like it. You pity gamblers throughout the game, and no one is really seen as doing well other than perhaps the house itself. Take Balatro as a comparison. Local Thunk saying you'd never sell to a gambling company in the way it almost makes fun of poker is an interesting way to clash with the likelihood of being seen as endorsing gambling. In fact, the game infamously had its rating unceremoniously changed to 18 plus after launch, effectively threatening to severely harm the game's sales. This is because it was seen as a gambling game by extension. Its rating has since changed to 3 plus, but this speaks to the worries of satire. It can be hard to satirize something intended to be engaging while making it entertaining without actually legitimizing it in the first place, especially when it being entertaining is part of what makes it work. It's like a game about loot boxes where said loot boxes do genuinely give some perk to use in game. At a certain point, you're just doing loot boxes, but with your tongue a little more into your cheek. Of course, you only pay for Balatro once, or like 3 times if you want it on PC, consoles, and mobile to play it literally anywhere. However, a game doesn't need you to pay any more real money to prey on the effects of gambling on the brain. For instance, many live service games are built on addictive models. Battle passes and constant live events are often part of the FOMO marketing. That means you just have to play it or you'll be left out of the loop. Balatro is perhaps a little too surreal and out there to place gambling quite as much into its real-life context as Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers. However, it does criticize it in the title alone. That word degenerate is diminutive to the lost souls who have found themselves in this wretched casino. As you make your way through it, there are even self-flagellating references to developers and players, people caught in the unholy creation of the game itself. You even take damage from drinking, and it seems to criticize you for gambling when you have to do that in the first place to actually play it. You functionally have to cheat to get anywhere. It's an atmosphere and tone that is maybe a little too tongue-in-cheek to serve as a real takedown of gambling, but it's certainly not an endorsement. Ironically, some of the worst parts of the game, like the lack of creativity around certain builds and the lack of approachability to some decks, makes it a more apt metaphor for the thing it's lampooning. Its difficulty and lack of balance is ironically kind of a great PSA against gambling. However, I can point out those parallels. I can talk about the effects of gambling on the game's NPCs, I can take part in the satirizing of the system, yet when you find yourself clicking to play again, you get caught up in that mindset. The belief that this time you will beat the house. The game was rigged from the start, but you aren't really playing its game. Even as I get mopped up and sent to the start again, I click that ready button and go in for just one more run. Thank you so much for watching this video about Dungeons and Degenerate Gamblers. I quite appreciated it. I think it, coming off the back of Balatro, isn't served as well, but I think also you kind of have to take these things in their own context, and I think in that way it does succeed at what it's trying to do. I would advise giving it a go, but I also totally get it if you kind of bounce off this one hard. It can be, it's not the most approachable in some areas, and I also get why you might not like that IP mashing. It's a lot. It's fun, but it's a lot. Thank you so much for watching. This is the first video I've put up in like a month. I keep meaning to, but I don't know, life's been very busy, and it's yeah, I won't make any excuses. I keep meaning to put stuff up and I just don't. So thank you if you've watched this. Thank you if you're a subscriber, and if you're not and you like this, it would really really help if you'd subscribe. I hit 500 subscribers recently, which I'm so happy with. I'm now trying to hit a watch time metric so I can say like, well, I've made a step in partner or whatever. But I don't know if I see that happening. Well, it doesn't really matter if it doesn't. I think that metric isn't the thing that satisfies me. Just being able to put these things out and talking to the void, I've really been enjoying, and I really appreciate that some people seem to be connecting with it. Thank you for watching.